That's okay. On to the Wednesday edition of Vogan's European Outlook. Hope everybody is keeping well and safe wherever you are. Certainly, we've got a very unsettled weather pattern continuing to bring some pretty wet conditions actually across many portions of the UK. But the January average is actually still firmly below average across the majority of the British Isles, with the exceptions of parts of the southwest, parts of Wales as well, seeing above average rainfall for this point in January. But you can see here, this is the 2 meter temperature anomalies for the continent so far this month. And of course, a big difference compared to the colder than average month that we've seen back in December. And really, the only part of the British Isles that's clinging on to average conditions for the first 11 days of the month is northwestern portions of Scotland. But we do have some interesting changes coming up, folks, here. We do have a bit of a shift in the upper air pattern over the Atlantic, and that is going to then start to change the orientation of low pressure coming in off the Atlantic here. So we're not, in essence, we're not totally shutting down this Atlantic pattern, but what we are is we're starting to change the orientation of the storm track in a way that's going to introduce colder conditions and even below average temperatures, I think, through this weekend and in through next week also. So, up until now, west to southwesterly areas of low pressure coming in, that has been allowing a lot of mild air to come in, and temperatures, 1 to 3 Celsius above average across southeastern portions of the British Isles, always that bit colder the further north. But even last night across the north of Scotland, my new weather station in the back garden, it registered 8 Celsius last night. I think it was about 10 o'clock at night with a howling westerly wind. So the temperature during the daytime was stuck at around 3 to about 4.5 degrees. And then once the winds really started to pick up with the area of low pressure to the north, driving the core of strongest winds across the northern half of the British Isles, we're seeing a significant uptick in the temperature. But really across the north, north of the central belt, temperatures have been subdued. There is still ice and there's still snow on the ground, say from about Perth northwards. Not the whole way up the A9 or anything, but certainly there is patches where we still have a covering of snow. So folks in the southeast of England, there is still a little bit of cold air trying to cling on, but of course it is well to the north. So this is off the GFS. This is the 2 meter temperature anomalies here of the operational model, and you can see the very mild conditions across the European continent. If we look at the current temperatures actually over Europe, you can see here that we are starting to push that core of coldest air east now. So we're starting to warm the temperatures up across the far west of Russia. And there's really very little of Europe that has cold conditions at the moment here. We do have, of course, below average temperatures, or sorry, below freezing temperatures, central and northern portions of Scandinavia. But bearing in mind, we are now approaching the middle portion of the winter, so this is still above average temperature wise. And of course, across the British Isles, you can see that the temperatures are milder than average. Now, as we go back to the 2 meter temperature anomaly chart here, you can see that we do start to see a little bit of a change taking place. So in comes the next area of deep low pressure, more wind, more rain, more gales and exposure, and warmer than average temperatures. Notice here that we've got a little bit of blues showing up across north of Scotland, where we're always holding on to that little bit of a colder air mass. But down across the Midlands, much of England, pretty much all of England, Wales, even up into the central belt, we're talking about above average temperatures for 12Z tomorrow. But as you notice here, as we play through the loop, still very warm across Central Europe. But notice what starts to take place. We start to see the mild conditions getting forced eastwards here, and it's really across the British Isles. Once we see an area of low pressure through the weekend moving from west to east, we then open the door to much colder conditions from the north. It's a polar maritime air mass, and it will bring temperatures below average. But I want to emphasize that it's nothing exceptional. It's nothing like a blast of bitter cold northerly winds. It's going to feel cold, and it will feel colder than average, but it's not an extreme air mass, if you get what I'm trying to say. But notice here as we progress through the end of the weekend and in the next week, we're bathed in blues once again. Even some of those purples representing temperatures really starting to drop quite significantly, especially across northern areas of the British Isles. And then if you notice here, as I continue to play through this animation, you notice here that the blues kind of cling on to the UK. We'll have flirts with milder conditions off the Atlantic, but notice here we continue to see the air coming in from a more northwesterly direction, and that takes us out to a week on Monday, by the way. So this is a way out to within the final 10 days of January. So we do have a run of at least a week or so, possibly 10 days of colder than average conditions overall. We may get a day or two here where the temperatures come back up again, but of course, with an Atlantic pattern, you've always got that fluid aspect in terms of the temperatures, the ups and downs. But the the fact is that what we're actually seeing is we're seeing areas of low pressure continue to come in from the west, but the orientation in which the direction in which they're coming in is changing. So here comes area of low pressure. During the course of Friday, we've got some cooler conditions coming in on the backside of that. Then in comes the next feature. We've got milder conditions coming in ahead of that feature. Some chillier in place brings snow to the highlands, as you can see. Then it's really once this main low pushes to the east, that's when we see the first push of colder air from the north here. So a more significant surge of cold. The reason why, in a sense, is that we're seeing a buildup of pressure. If you notice here, this area of low pressure, or high pressure, should I say, get my highs and lows mixed up. You see the buildup of pressure here as this system then slides across the northern half of the British Isles. It's once we see this system move eastwards, you start to see the kind of the orientation starting to change. The high pressure starts to lift northwards, and then it forces the colder air over Greenland and over Iceland to then come down into the British Isles pattern here. So as we continue to play through this loop, more areas of low pressure coming in, but with that area of high pressure sticking its nose further north up into the northwest Atlantic towards the Baffin Straits, areas of low pressure that come in have that bit of colder air associated with them, and of course the air mass behind each area of low pressure then becomes colder and colder here. So you notice here that the precipitation, according to the GFS operational, is indicating more in the way of winteriness as opposed to just rainfall, because we've changed the balance of the pattern to a colder scenario. So yes, remaining unsettled, but it's turning below average in terms of temperature here, and that looks as if it's going to continue. So the messy picture looks as if it's going to maintain itself through much of next week, but it's going to bring the return of snow, I think, to many parts of the north of the say the central belt. Really, I think we're going to start to increase the chance of seeing snow. And then if you notice here that we've got an area of high pressure to the north, we've got this deep area of low pressure over southern Scandinavia, and this could bring some fairly cold air actually into the British Isles during the second half of next week. But of course, this is a long way out. Each individual model run, you have to take that with a pinch of salt. The ensemble, of course, it's a collection of runs. That tends to have a little bit more validity to it. But, when I'm showing you this kind of individual GFS operational run, of course, the details have to be taken with a large grain of salt here. But the overall emphasis is going to be on colder conditions moving in to the British Isles. Now, looking at the 850 temperatures here, you can see quite nicely what's going on. So at the moment, we're still in this kind of milder theme with the storm track as west to southwesterly. But notice here that as we progress in towards the weekend, then we'll start to see warmer air getting lifted north up over the Atlantic, and therefore we start to tilt the storm track almost from a southwest to a northwest direction, and we are on the colder side of the flow in the mid and upper levels of the atmosphere. Look at this here. By the time we reach Monday of next week here, Notice here the area of high pressure over the Atlantic is pushing warmer air north on the western side of the basin, and then, of course, forcing the colder air downstream of that to the east over the British Isles. And I think this is a direct response to the Mann-Julian Oscillation, a fairly robust pulse of convective thunderstorms over the western portion of the Pacific. It's now starting to change the overall pattern across the North Pacific. That is having downstream effects, and it will have more significant downstream effects, I think, as we progress through next week and then possibly beyond that. But you notice here that as we progress in through next week, where colder is much more available, much more associated with the Eastern Atlantic, Western Europe pattern. So what does this mean in terms of snowfall? I think we're going to increase the chance of seeing snowfall across, particularly the northern half of the British Isles, but not exclusively. This is the latest run off the GFS, and you can see here this is the snow depth chart. And notice how the snow starts to expand fairly widely across Scotland into early next week here. So notice here that it's not picking up much in the central belt. It's mainly above 1 to 200 meters, I think. We're going to start to lay back down a snow cover, and we could see temperatures, especially at night time with clearer skies and lighter winds, returning back towards the -8 to -10 range, I think, in sheltered glens with the snow cover on the ground. But notice here, even Wales, the north of England, starting to pick up on some snow early next week, and then even as we progress into Monday of next week, notice even the Midlands, parts of the east, down into northern portions of East Anglia, that is becoming more interesting in terms of snow cover across the UK. And as I continue to play through the loop, it's even picking up on snow in more southern portions of the British Isles. Again, take this with a pinch of salt, but I think it's quite interesting nonetheless to see what it's portraying. And you notice here how, as we progress right the way through next week, the model indicates snow remaining on the ground across much of Scotland. And of course, the reason for that is we're much colder overall. So it looks as if it's becoming increasingly likely that we're going to maintain the unsettled theme. The Atlantic is not shutting down, but with high pressure building over the western portion of the North Atlantic, that is then sending the colder air mass south and encompassing pretty much all of the UK and Ireland. So that's it for today. I do appreciate you watching. As always, please drop a comment in the section below. And indeed, if you haven't already done so, please hit that subscribe button. Bye for now.